Now, what is ISA? First of all, it stands for Integration Solution Advisory Methodology. And what is an Integration Solution Advisory Methodology is, so what SAP has done is, in order to make life easy for new customers, they have created a set of, like a library, I would say, a set of PowerPoint, a lot of presentations to make the clients understand like what are the best practices, because any client who has taken a new subscription with SAP BTP, so obviously initially they will not know, because SAP BTP is very vast. There are a lot of things in it. So from the client's point of view, they will not understand initially like what is the starting point, what is needed for their organization, what is not, how should they subscribe, what are the best practices to use APIs, integrations. So what SAP has done, that they have created like some PowerPoints that is based on all integration knowledge at SAP. It is aimed at integration architects. With this methodology, existing integration solutions can be documented and described, as well as integration requirements can be determined and mapped to specific services. So they have provided certain templates, right? And the organizations who are using SAP BTP, they can use these templates to just start. Because if we already have a template, right? If we have a template, then we will know what are the steps we should follow. So in that ways, with these templates, with these PowerPoint slides, it is easy for clients to follow the steps initially to set up the account and set up their integrations. But again, like this is not a mandatory step, it is just provided like a add-on for the clients. Maybe the organization who is using SAP BTP, they already have experienced resources who know how to do the setup, how to use it. In that case, there is no need for referring to ISA. So I will also tell you where it is, ISA, how you can subscribe to ISA. But again, it's not anything which is mandatory. It mandatory for organizations to use. It is entirely up. It's optional actually. If you want to refer to this methodology, you can. Otherwise, uh, the organizations can have their own way of working also. So this method helps corporate architects to design their integration strategy. It consists of collection of typical integration styles and patterns, assignment to integration services, architectural designs for integration, design criteria, how to define roles and responsibilities within integration scenarios. And in ISA methodology, there are basically four important points. One is assess your integration strategy, then design your hybrid integration platform, then define integration best practices and enable a practice of empowerment. And although, as I said, like this is not a mandatory thing for you to do when you are working in real time, to subscribe to ISA methodology and follow their templates, follow their like design patterns. It is entirely optional. But if you are going for certification after the CPI course, then from certification point of view, this topic is important. You usually like you will get one or two questions from this ISA methodology. So again, ISA, it stands for Integration Solution Advisory, as shown in the center. And along with that, we have integration domains, integration styles, use case patterns, integration strategy, governance, and this is like open SAP and third party technologies. But in within this integration solution advisory, we have these four important points: assess integration, design integration platform, best practices, and enable a practice of empowerment. Now let's see these 4 points. The first one is assess your integration strategy. So it means like document, review your integration architecture, scoping of focus areas like future building blocks, use case driven approach. So what it means is maybe whenever we have an organization has a new subscription to SAP, and they want to use their platform for creating some integrations. So for integrations there should be some integration strategy which needs to be defined. And when defining the integration strategy means the first thing is whenever we are creating an integration we should know about our source system and the target system. It's not necessary that we need to know about their technical details, how the source and target system works, but we should at least know from an integration point of view is what we need from the source system, in which format we will get the data from the source system, right? At least these two details we should know. And about the target system we should know like in which format the target system is accepting the data, what fields the target system needs, right? And then according to that we have to build our integration in between the source and the target system. So the first thing is to assess the integration strategy, like how I want to create the integration, what is the best way to create the integration. So all these steps we should, using this ISA template, we will be able to document the integration architecture. Then design your hybrid integration platform. Map use case patterns to integration technologies, derive integration guidelines for your organization, reflect customer context. Now, each organization will have their own set of guidelines. For example, when you are creating any integration, then you might follow certain naming convention that my integration should start with this name. There is some integration code at the start, then underscore, then some small description of the integration, like this. Or the other organization, they might follow a different style of naming. They might start with some integration code, then they want to mention the source system name and target system name. Like this, they want to create the name of the integration. Similarly, in the integration, there are a lot of components, right? In CPI, there are a lot of components which are used to create the integration. So when we are creating an integration, there has to be some predefined set of naming conventions that we should follow. Otherwise, if one developer is following some naming convention, the other is following some other naming convention, then it doesn't look like a tidy solution, right? And also, like if there are like any external audits or something, then it doesn't look good, or like, and even if like someone, any new developer who has joined your team, then for the new person also it is difficult to understand like which component is what. So this is just one example, like naming conventions of the components. Each organization will have their own predefined set. Similarly, there might be a predefined set of unit testing. Let's say if you have created the integration. Now there you have, just for the ease of testing and everything, we have predefined some set of scenarios that we have to test, that like are generic for all the integrations, and we need to test them for all the integrations. So for example, let's say your source system is SuccessFactors, which is used for storing HR employee data. It is an HR module, and your target system can be anything else. So in you have predefined some test scenarios which always should be tested. For example, one scenario you have defined is when you hire an employee, a new employee is hired in the organization, then how the integration should behave. So this is a generic scenario which will be common across all the integrations. What happens when an employee is terminated? Then again, it's a generic scenario. Then there can be like that some other generic scenarios which you can create. And again, these scenarios are entirely dependent on the organization as per their guidelines, individual guidelines. Then integration best practices. So once you have like your design guideline in place, once you know about your source and your target systems, once you know about the integration architecture, then when you are just about to start the integration development, then you should know what are the best practices of creating the integration you should follow during development of the integration. And again, as I said, like this is not a mandatory thing from SAP for you to follow, but maybe like if the SAP developer, whoever is the developer of the integrations, if they already are experienced, they already know what are the best practices for creating the integration. So it's not necessary to follow them, and it's just an optional thing. So like I will not go in details what are the best practices, but whatever is the best practices for the organization, they are captured in this part of the ISA methodology. And then they enable a practice of empowerment. Now what it means is, let's say in your team there are five people who knows about CPI, they are the developers. And obviously when you are creating an integration, then one developer will work on the integration. But once the integration is completed, it's developed, then what SAP recommends is to share that knowledge throughout your team. And it makes sense because if only one person knows about the integration, then it creates a bottleneck for the whole project, for the whole team. Because if that developer, let's say, leaves the organization or go on a leave, then other developers obviously they will not understand what has been developed in the integration. So it is always a best practice as recommended by SAP that whatever the integration or API which you have created or developed, the knowledge should be shared among the team, among the developer. They are saying it as developer community, but it means as your team only. So these are the 4 points which falls under ISA methodology. Any doubts in this ISA methodology? Anything you want to check?
No, Abhishek, you can continue.
Okay. Okay. Now the next topic we will cover is API first approach. And this is again SAP recommends that we should always use API first approach. Now, first of all, before going API first approach, we should know what is an API. So API, it stands for Application Programming Interface, and it specifies the operations as well as like inputs and outputs of a software component. It defines functionalities that are independent of their respective implementations so that these implementations can vary without affecting the user of the API. Now, let's like if I have to explain this in like a very simple layman language, that let's suppose there is some functionality which is like very frequently used in your integrations, right? So instead of creating that functionality every time for each individual integration, we create a generic solution, a generic functionality, and then just use it whenever we need it in any of our integration, so that the same functionality we don't have to create again and again for each individual integration. The same thing applies for an API also. In an API, there will be some functionality which is implemented. For each API, there will be some input which we will provide to the API. Then, as per the functionality of the API will perform the functionality, do the calculations and manipulations, and then there will be a fixed set of output which the API will return. So let's say, for example, you have written a functionality to maybe just to add two numbers, like very basic example, just to add two numbers. So what your input will be, there will be two inputs which you will get. Two inputs will be like the both the numbers which you will send the input in the API. Then in the API will add those numbers. That's the functionality of the API, and the output will be one field. That will be the result. What is the result of adding the two numbers? So that will be your output. So this is a generic functionality. Now in your integration, whenever you want to maybe let's say add two numbers, then you don't need to write the logic of adding the two numbers. You can use this common functionality, and you can send the two numbers which you want to add, and automatically you will get the result. So adding the two numbers, I know like it's a very simple example, but in general, like if there is any solution, like a big solution, maybe a complex solution which you want to implement in your integrations, then what SAP recommends that we should create an API for that solution, so that the same solution can be used in a generic way in in all the integrations. So this is what API first approach is, and what it means, what is an API. The API first approach is an approach to the software design that focuses on the API to create applications that can be easily connected to each other. The API first creates ecosystems of applications that are modular, reusable, and extensible. So yeah, these are just the standard terminologies, but this is what API first approach means. That again, this is again one of the recommendations from SAP. It is not necessary or mandatory for a developer to follow API first approach. Okay. Now, in our during the course of our integration suite, the first thing which we will study is about the APIs, API first approach, about API management, how to create APIs, how to consume APIs. And once our APIs are ready, then we will go to CPI. We will use integrations, we will create integrations in CPI and use the APIs which we have already created. But the first point which we will do in our throughout the course is the about the API management. And when we are working on APIs, then there are two terminologies which we should know. One is the API provider and one is the API consumer. Now, whenever we are creating an API, okay, then it's not like we will just create a program or a functionality and start creating that logic functionality in the API. There is an API provider, and then there is a consumer who will consume the API. An API provider provides an interface with technical features, and it's like this point number one in this diagram. This is the API provider. This interface can be consumed by a service, which is shown by point number 5, and the representation corresponds to the socket number 2, and the service acts in the role of the API consumer. So basically, like, what it means is that we have an API provider. The API provider, it is the responsibility of API provider to implement that logic, what the API will do. That generic functionality which I was explaining you, like, so someone needs to define that functionality somewhere. So it is the duty of the API provider to implement that logic. So API provider will do the technical implementation of the API. Now, once the API provider has created the application, then it has to be used by someone. So an API consumer, a consumer or a client, an end user, they cannot directly use the services. They cannot directly use the API. So first the API provider will create the API, and then there will be a service which will use those technical features, right? So for API provider, the API consumer is this point number 5 service. And then the actual client, the actual API consumer will then use this service. So for API consumer client, API provider is this service number 5. They cannot directly connect with API provider, right? So once we are creating the integration, sorry, APIs, we will see how we create the API provider, and then we create the API, and then how the client consumes the API. But for now, what you can just remember is that what is an API provider, what is an API consumer. Any doubts in this API first approach and API provider consumer? Okay. I will show you API provider APIs in this integration suite. Okay. So when we open our integration suite, then in the configure tab, we have this option APIs. To configure APIs, we go to configure APIs. And here in the configure page, you will see different options like API proxies, API provider, certificates, value maps, policy templates. But here, like since I wanted to show you API provider, I will just go on this API provider tab and we will see an option here how to create the API provider, sorry. Will provide some name and description to the API provider. Then we have to provide some settings like the API provider, where is our API provider, whether we are using the API provider through the internet or is it on premise. For example, in like most scenarios it will be internet, because since these days everything, all the systems, they are available on the cloud. But if there is any system which is available on premise, then for that we have to select on premise, type as on premise, then open connect with cloud integration. So we have multiple options to create an API provider. And then in the catalog service settings, we just provide a URL which we want to create for our API. So these are some of the technical settings which are provided in the API provider when we are creating the API provider. Uh, so once we are like in our hands-on exercises, then we will cover these topics more in detail, because right now I don't want to like confuse you with all the information in one go. So for example, this is one API provider which was created. In the connection we used type as internet, and this is the system. This is the host system which has all the data, like the source data basically. And we, for this API provider, this is the source system. So this is the host, the port number is 443, and these are the URLs which we have provided, and this is the URL which will be used. This is the API provider URL which will be used for creating the actual API. And how to create the API? We create the API by using this tab, API proxies. And there are again different ways to create an API, and one of the way to create an API is by using the API provider. So the API provider which was created, that can be used to create an API. So in the diagram which I was showing you, there was an API provider, and then it was connected to a service, and then it was connected to a client. So this is the API provider. Here we create the API provider. Then when we create this uh, API here under API proxies, so this is like a service which we are creating. And then once the service is creating, then these APIs service, it can be used by the consumer who will consume these APIs. And in our scenario, the consumer will be CPI, because once these APIs are created, then we will use or consume these APIs in CPI. So we will create the API provider here. For the API providers, the source system we have to define, and then we create the API by using this provider, and then the client will be CPI, because that is where we will be using these APIs. Now in real time scenario, it can be anything. Maybe for example, in your scenario in the organization, maybe the organization is not using CPI, they are using some other integration tool, let's say Dell Boomi or anything. So again, in that case also, API provider and API will be created here in the integration suite. And then once these APIs are ready, then it will be consumed by the client, API consumer. Okay. So I just wanted to show you these like some screens, but we will see like how the setup is done when we will do when our account is ready. Okay, so now maybe we can try to set up the account. Uh, so last week we added integration suite in the instances and subscriptions, and we provided two roles. And after the two roles, we were able to see the screen SAP integration suite. But this menu option on the left hand side, it was not visible. So what we need to do for the complete setup of integration suite is if we scroll down on the home page of integration suite, we will see capabilities, and we will see again in detail what is meant by capabilities. But just for account setup, we go to capabilities, click on manage capabilities, and we need to add capabilities, cloud integration and API management. We click on add capabilities, and we select the capabilities which we want to add. So build integration scenarios and manage APIs. These two capabilities we need to select and click on next, and then automatically these capabilities they will get activated over here. And once these capabilities are added in the integration suite, then again we go back to our trial account, sub account trial. We go to users, and there are some more roles that we have to assign to our user. These are all the roles. I'll share all these roles with you, but before that you need to reach at least till this level. At least you need to access the integration suite. You should be able to access the integration suite. So let me stop sharing, and we can just give a try. I will make you the presenter. Yeah, you can share your screen, Deepika, and we'll just try to see if
Yeah.
things
Are you able
work.
to see, right?
Hmm.
Actually, here we have to delete the existing artifacts which I created previously.
Please delete existing one.
Mm.
Okay, did you created any integrations or
Yeah, I have created actually.
okay, so then let's go. But then you are not able to access integration suite, right? Then how will
Yes.
you delete it?
Mm.
Because first you need to open the integration suite. Do you
Yeah,
have the
that's right.
URL somewhere in your history? What was the URL of your
Where should I?
integration suite?
No,
No,
I
in
don't.
your browser history, maybe you will find. Uh, it will start with your this global account name 32 BC.
Mhm. Here it is 32 BC trial.
But this is just the BTP cockpit.
Yeah, trial.
Uh, okay. Can you click on those three dots? Maybe let's see what options are there in the integration suite. If you go,
I'm showing only delete option.
okay, just delete. Scroll down. If there is already maybe an active, yeah, scroll down. What is there in the instances? Basic. So either you create a new account with a new email, or we create a new sub account, and in the sub account you go back to this overview.
Wait,
Now click on this overview button on the left hand side. Yeah, so this is the trial account which was set up by SAP. It has this 4 instances and subscriptions, 77 entitlements. So like this, either we create a new trial account and add all these entitlements and subscriptions what SAP has added, and then you will use integration suite from your sub account, not the trial account of SAP.
okay.
So yeah, click on that trial home, not trial home, but that 32 BC. Uh, and let me see if there is an option to copy the existing account. No, you will have to create a new sub account actually.
Here I can create, right?
Yeah, you can open a duplicate tab, because after creating the sub account you will have to add all those features again. You can give
Okay.
any name to your sub account.
Region which Singapore I have to select it.
Yes.
Should I create?
Yeah. Then in one tab you can open the trial account, and in the other you we will just configure this sub account too.
Okay, it's on body. Do I have to enable the Cloud Foundry?
Yes. Click on the overview. No, first before add, you will not be able to add because click on overview.
Okay.
So here now you see it says 17 entitlements and one instance and subscriptions. But if you
Okay.
compare it with your trial account, which was created by SAP, then it has a lot more entitlements.
Yes.
So before we need to add all those entitlements in this account also, and only then everything will be available.
Okay.
So so that's what I was saying. Like if you open a duplicate tab and just compare with the trial account, what all entitlements are there, then all those entitlements you will have to add in your new sub account also.
Okay.
But like I would recommend, like like far easy to create a new account, a new test account basically. Because if let's say you miss anything and then
Hmm.
later on it does not work, like maybe the testing is not working or some access problem is coming, then we will face that
Yeah.
problem.
Okay. Okay. I will create the new account and it will be easy for me to order.
Hmm. Yeah. And let me see if there is. You can also, what you can do,
Hmm.
in your BTP cockpit on the top right hand side, there is one icon, get support. So you can try to click there and see if you are able to check this
Here.
problem, integration suite problem,
This
if they
is the
can tell.
one get support, right?
Hmm, hmm.
Hmm. Okay.
Okay, so give it a try and let me know tomorrow if you are able
Yeah.
to set up the account.
Okay.